Chest up, shoulders back. This is Revival Fitness, and we are going to dive into some nitty-gritty details of programming today. If you are somebody that has only trained for hypertrophy, this may be a bit surprising for you because you really don't need any percentages to do so.
The numbers, basically. What do they mean?
Although I believe the more experienced you get, they are going to become helpful. It's called some type of periodization, and there's a lot of ways you can really spin that. You're not going to be able to add +5 to the bar or to the dumbbells, whatever you're using, every single week. If that was the case, people out here would be deadlifting literal tons of weight. And if you're on this channel, you probably like to be strong as well as being big, even though you can't really separate the two, at least if you're natural. Now that said, people use that almost like it's an insult against me or like it's a slur, because I talk about strength and I give strength standards. They'll be like, Revival, this guy's a power lifter, don't listen to him if you want to get big. And it's like, I've never competed in powerlifting. I don't really think I want to. That just doesn't completely interest me. I don't really want to spend 9 hours in a sweaty singlet covered in chalk, walking around a high school gym to do 9 1-rep maxes. I would be more inclined to walk around for 9 hours covered in sticky spray tan and a thong. Yeah, fitness is pretty weird, but just because you want to optimize hypertrophy, that does not mean you cannot get strong and focus on low reps or even gasp 1-rep maxes at the same time. And there have been a lot of iterations of 5-3-1 since the original came out by Jim Wendler. If you have bought and are using one of my intermediate programs, you should look into 5-3-1 if you are starting to plateau on your bigger exercises. I recommend this as your first test with percentages. I'm going to explain it in this video and break it down if you're not familiar, but once you get the hang of it, it's very easy to understand. It does not take a whole lot of time. This is why I really like 5-3-1 and why I always find myself going back to it. It's like comfort food. You only have to spend a short amount of time in the low rep ranges or maxing out on these very heavy exercises. Then you can really focus most of your time and energy on the so-called hypertrophy training. So it's great for the lazy wannabe powerlifter, if you want to call it that, who likes to be strong and max out from time to time, but I don't want to put tons of effort into it. So before we dive into all the numbers, what's also going to work very well for your purposes and mine as well is Levels grass-fed whey protein. I've been using Levels whey for a couple of years now, and I have never had to look for another brand since. This is a clean product. It is hormone-free, soy-free, as well as gluten-free. There's nothing fake ever, no artificial fillers, a number of flavors are available. All orders come with free shipping on their website. It mixes well, and I've got a lot of comments from you guys saying how much you like them too. So if you guys are looking to give Levels Whey a try, you can use my code GOM20 on levelsprotein.com. You're going to receive 20% off of your entire order. Alright, so let's begin on the base level of what 5-3-1 is. It is a percentage-based system of a 1-rep max. It is a 3-week wave, meaning once you can get the desired number of reps, depending on the week that you're in, you are going to add 5 to 10 pounds to the given 1-rep max, and then repeat this process. You add 5 pounds, this UB stands for upper body. That means overhead press, bench press, incline press, anything regarding that. And then 10 pounds to lower body lifts, primarily squat and deadlift variations. You could also probably say heavy good mornings. Let's start from week 1. You are gonna do 3 total sets. So the first 2 count as ramp up sets leading to the top set. So the 85, 90, and 95 here, these are the top set of each week. So on week 1, for example, you're going to do your first ramp up at 65% of the max, next one at 75. You're going to be doing 5 reps for those. Then on the top set of 85%, your goal is to get 5+, meaning if you don't get at least 5, you are not going to add weight for the next week because you did not technically complete the task at hand. Then go to week 2, same thing, 3 plus, ramp up set 1, ramp up set 2. On your final set, I should say your top set, you are gonna go for at least 3 or more. The goal is to get more. That means that you're in a sweet spot to reliably gain strength on this lift. Then the final week of the wave, you're going for at least 1 clean rep, if not more. So in total, you're doing 3 sets in the conventional style, but only one of those is a true top set. You could call this a working set essentially, because these ones are just ramp ups to get to this point. The 1 RM that you're working off of is actually a percentage, 90%, of another 1 RM, say X. So this is to account for the fact that guys have very big egos, because you know how it goes. This system, or anything requiring a percentage of 1 rep max, you are by default going to overestimate because you want to put more weight on the bar and hit your PR faster, or so you think. So what's really happening here is that you're using a fraction of a fraction. And this might sound like it's going to be too easy, and that's a common complaint or misunderstanding about 5-3-1, at least right off the bat, because you're taking the X number, 90% of that, and then 85% of that, for example. On the first number of waves, you may be getting 7, 8, maybe sometimes even up to 9 reps on, say, the first week. Or on the 3 week, you're getting 5 or 6, maybe 3 or 4 here, right? So it's common for people to say, oh, well, this weight is way too light. And then they will turn back on this and they will go to 100% of X because they're like, this is too easy. Then you jump the weight too quickly, and then before you know it, you're barely getting any of these numbers. So that is why Wendler, the author, included the 90%. He explicitly says this in the article, the original one, and in the books on this topic. This is to account for guys' bullshit. Because whether you test your max yourself, and you have a spotter help you on the bench, or you really hitch up a deadlift, or you squat and you're 5 inches above parallel, mentally you're like, okay, that counted, bro. And you count that as your max, when in reality, it's probably closer to 90%. And even if you don't test 1 rep maxes, because if you don't want to or just don't have the time beforehand, that makes sense. What a lot of guys will do is use a calculator. You can find a bunch of calculators online that estimate your 1 RM, giving a number of reps. This also accounts for the fact that, and I've experienced this too, in my opinion, most of these calculators are going to overestimate your max. So let's say, for example, you're stuck at 205 for 5 on the bench press. You use an online calculator, it says your 1 rep max comes out to 230.7 pounds, just round down to 230. You are not going to use that 230 as your %1 RM. We're going to take 90% of that. So this is what you calculated. We then account for the bullshit. Your %1 RM that you're working with for all of these things here is 207 pounds. Now, this one is tough. You could round up to 210, round down to 205. I know you all are going to round up in pretty much every single case when there's a number that's not totally even with plate math, right? So let's say you go up to 210, whatever the case is. That is the number you're working with for these percentages. So let's say you're doing 210. Let's say we're doing week number 1, for example. Your first ramp up set of the day would be with 136.5. So to say 135, 1 big plate aside. That is your first set. Then we're going to do 210 times 0.75. Your next ramp up is with, you could call that 155. And then your top set times 210. Your top set of that day, round up, is going to be 180 pounds. So like I said, you are probably going to get more than the prescribed reps, noticeably so, maybe by a handful or at least a few starting out. That is good. That means you're on the right track. You're going to hit a lot of PRs coming out of the gate. You can keep that up for a number of months even. Then eventually you're going to start to slow down because that's just how it goes. Don't take the easier reps at the beginning as a sign, oh, I have to up the weight. Stay consistent with it because eventually it is going to get harder. So let's say then you go through all these weeks, you get above the prescribed reps. We're talking about the bench press. That means add +5. So your 210 is going to become 215. So then the following wave, take 215 times 85%. You're going to be working with 182.7 pounds. Now granted, last time we rounded up to 180. You can round this up to 185, but in any case, you want to make sure that you are at least adding some type of weight. If you're more closer to early intermediate, late novice, as opposed to more advanced, these numbers might not always have a huge variance in them, like we just saw. Last time we got, what, 178 in a decimal, this time 182, so you can just round up with those. So if you're in that position to where your numbers are relatively close, they're going to be very close on things like OHP, especially things that are comparatively lighter. Just add weight in some form when you repeat the waves. And that is one final thing I have to note about all of this when it comes to the reps. I got to write this down. Do not fail. Probably the biggest mistake guys make with this or any other system when it comes to more strength percentage based stuff, they are going to push this stuff to the limit. So that is one sign that you need to decrease your percent 1 RM. If you're getting to the prescribed reps on a given week, or even if you can't get that many, like if you're doing this week right here, 5+, and you're on the bench press, and by the third rep, you're grinding and struggling and you're starting to hip thrust a little bit, you are going too heavy. You got to lower this back down. I would say as a rule, if the 1 RM is too heavy, you can reduce it by 10%. This one, after you adjust for the 90%, I'd say that's a good general rule. But even if you're getting to these reps and you get above them, say you're on 5+ again, and you get to rep number 6, and you hit, I like to say 1 RIR, I should write that here, 1 RIR is a good point to get to for pretty much all of the top sets. If you go beyond this point, if you get to say that 6 rep and you hit it and it's tough but it's doable, and you're thinking about it, you say, screw it, I'm going to go for 7, you lower the bench press bar down, it doesn't come back up, then you have to hip thrust, or the spotter has to help. You're not counting anything. If a spotter touches the bar, if you have to cheat, squats can be difficult because it's hard to gauge your form as you get more fatigued on squats. So I would record your squats especially, or maybe you find a point where it's like, okay, I feel my hamstring touch my calf. That's how I know I'm there. Maybe you could do box squats, even if you're just tapping your butt onto a box or an upright dumbbell, not even fully sitting down, to ensure depth, especially as you get fatigued. Those reps always just incrementally get higher and higher than they were the previous rep. So keep this stuff in mind. But even on the bench, right? Guys will lower the bench to their chest. Last rep, oh, they only go halfway down, or they almost touch their chest and they don't. Everything needs to be totally consistent. Same range of motion, same tempo, same cadence. Do not fail. You're going to fail at some point pushing yourself. That's how it goes, right? So if you do, ideally have safety arms set up. You see so many of these videos, these people don't know how to use the gym equipment properly at all. They will have safety arms there and they just don't even put them up. It's unbelievable. So use the damn safety arms if you have them. If you're squatting, you should have them. Deadlifting, you can easily fail by letting go, but even so, if you push deadlifts past 1 RIR very intensely, you start rounding, hitching, you could hurt your back, you know, pull a hamstring, something like that. Don't push those too far. And on the bench, if you can't get safety arms on the bench, hopefully you have a spotter you can trust. You can also do the roll of shame, or don't put clips on the ends. You could dump the weight off both sides. You have to kind of judge your environment and all that other stuff. But the key thing is these reps all need to be clean. Ideally, you should have about 1 RIR in your estimation. It feels like you might be able to do 1 more, but you're not sure. That's when you stop the set. The last rep is tough, noticeably so, but you can get out unscathed. One more thing to note too. You may read in the original 531 articles that after every week 3, you should deload. Then you do the plus 5 to 10 pounds and repeat. Jim Wendler originally put that in there. He has since changed his stance. I think now he says 7 to 8 weeks is more suitable, but I believe he advocates that you should deload as needed. I would advocate the same. As I said earlier, if these are too hard for you to do with consistent form, you might not even need to deload. You could just reduce this. If you have been getting these consistently, then 1 week, right, you start to kind of flatline a bit. I would say in general, 2 weeks. If you plateau on 1 or more of these main exercises for 2 weeks, then it's time to deload. So if you are going to deload, he calls for 40, 50, and 60% of the percent 1 RM. I have tested this type of deload. I've done other deloads without doing 531 where you do, 50% volume, 50% reps, variations of that. I've also just taken a week off entirely, sometimes for the sake of just, you know, you get really tired of going to the gym a lot, especially if you're pushing yourself really hard. I've talked about before, guys, that is the #1 way to know if you're training hard enough in general, if you look forward to your rest days. Because you see these guys always say, man, I'm in the gym 6-7 days a week, brah, all this other shit, beast mode all the time. Dude, if you can somehow manage to go to the gym 6-7 days a week and you think you're pushing yourself that hard, you're probably not. You might just be that cranked out on pre-workout and caffeine, God knows what else, that you managed to do that for a while, but you're going to plateau hard, you're going to limit your own muscle growth, and once again, you're probably not pushing yourself as much as you really think you are. If you are never looking forward to your rest days, because I do this on a 4-week split, you could also spin this 5 days if you want to add an arm day, something like that. You could even do 5-3-1 3 days a week, maybe squat, bench, deadlift day, however else you want to spin it. You know, you can look at my programs. Again, I have different outlines for that, but you need to recover ultimately. So you don't need to deload every 4th week. That's a bit overkill. But whether you do a week off or this method with the main lifts, whatever you want to do, if you are too fatigued, guys, understand this in terms of gaining strength especially, that will destroy your strength gains. I said earlier, do 1 RIR, especially right here for these exercises. A lot of powerlifting programs will call for even 3 RIR in some cases, just to really adapt to the form. Once again, we're not peaking for strength, the vast majority of us, so we don't have to do that in terms of powerlifting. That said though, just in general, if you're always hitting failure, always really fatigued, you're dragging yourself into the gym, you're going to plateau your own strength way more. And I know, oh, but I got the pump, brah. I got the great pump and I am exhausted, my chest is really sore and I can't sit down after leg day, all these memes and stuff. That's cool in the moment, dude, but once again, the pump does not mean you're growing muscle. You need to focus on getting stronger over time on all the stuff you do. And this is just one way of doing it with the bigger exercises. Now, something else people have mentioned too, I've had guys ask me, can I use this for, say, dumbbell bench press or something like that? The thing is, as we just saw earlier with the bench press example, those numbers tend to get pretty close, especially the more closer to novice, early intermediate that you are, namely on the upper body exercises too. If you try to do this with dumbbells, man, I mean, it's barely gonna be noticeable, ultimately. Even if you're pretty strong with lighter stuff, like, because dumbbells comparatively are always gonna be lighter, and especially with upper body, it's gonna be a crapshoot at that point. So this is best suited for barbells, right? It doesn't have to just be bench, squat, deadlift. You can do OHP, you can do incline bench, you could do Romanian deadlifts, you know, you could do good mornings of some type. There's a lot of ways you can do the barbells. There's a lot of variations a lot of people oftentimes don't think about, but this in general is best suited for bigger barbell exercises. The rest of the things you're going to be doing, right, because how 5-3-1 works, really, it's the pinnacle of a power building program. You're going to do the 5-3-1 to start, and then after that, you're just going to be doing accessories. So you can have this exercise, this exercise, this exercise, this exercise. These right here can all be done in basically double or dynamic double progression, which means you just hit the set and rep goal. So say you want to go for 3 times 8. You hit it, work up until 3 times 8, then just increase the weight. Do that for all these exercises or some other variants of this. But the percentages themselves, you're going to save those for the main barbell exercises that you start the day with. And that leads into the variation that I came up with. And you can call it a type of RPT or reverse pyramid training. Even though that sounds kind of boring, I like to think of it as reminiscent of pinning tren. And here's how it goes. So we do the normal stuff here, right? Work up to the top sets. Then what's going to happen, it's basically just adding some extra volume and doing that in a back off style. So let's say we do our 85% on a given day. We do TS, that's our top set. We're going to do 2 sets after that. You can call those BO or back off sets. So including the top set, we are doing 3 in total. Top set, back off, you could say 1, and then back off 2. But no matter the numbers being used, the top set comes from wherever on this list that you're getting it. Back off set number 1 is 90% of said number. Back off set number 2 is 80% of said number. So at this point, we're working with a fraction of a fraction. Remember the x from earlier, of a fraction. So let's say, for example, we're doing squats. We're on week 1. We're at 85% of the 1 RM. We're at 275 pounds. So we do 275 as our top set. We're then going to multiply that by 0.9. That is going to give us our first back off set amount. So let's do that math real quick. That comes out to 247.5. Let's just round up and say 250. That is our first back off set at 90% of the top set working weight. And this is where the reverse pyramid style comes into play. Let's say, for instance, we're going for 5+. Let's say that we get 6 reps with 275. You'll likely get something around 8 to 9 for the first back off set. So that's pretty much the rationale of reverse pyramid training. You reduce the weight, but in accordance, your reps are going to go up, at least a little bit. Now keep in mind, guys, these reps are not going to jump a lot in most cases. One, because, right, 90% is still a good percentage of the top set weight. And second of all, the top set is still your money set, right? I mean, that's where the big PRs are going to happen. The extra volume that comes with the 2 back off sets, that's also important. You are getting practice with the exercise, every repetition, setting up, all that good stuff. Also keep in mind too, when you hit PRs, say for example, right, you could normally squat 250 for 12 if you did this fresh, but you're doing it after the top set of 275, so you're going to inevitably lose reps with that. Don't let that discourage you, and don't think that's a bad thing, like, oh, I could normally do 250 for more than that. That's okay because you're already fatigued going into it. But if you can build a fatigued strength, like rep PRs after a top set, and you can work up to 250 times 12, for example, after a higher weight, you are absolutely building muscle. After we complete our first back off set, let's do the second back off set. And we're going to take 275 times 80%. So 220 is the weight for our second and final back off set. Let's just keep the trend consistent. We get 6, we get 8. Then say you get 10 reps. I would say in my experience, this is pretty standard over here. So you usually are going to be able to add, say, 2 to 3 reps per back off set compared to what you got on the top set. Now, sometimes this could vary. If the top set really crushed you, because some days that's just going to happen, you may get the same number on the first back off set. Once again, think about signs to deload. If your back off sets are barely above the reps of the top set consistently, it's probably time to deload for this given exercise. But this is the method that I used to finally bench 315. I worked up to that over the course of a number of months, from the summer into this winter. So it's top set using this given top set percentage from the main chart. Then we take the first back off set at 90% of that, second back off set, 80% of that. So unlike the conventional 5-3-1 where you just have one top set and then you move on to something else, I think the boring but big version would have you do like 5 by 10 of the same exercise following this, but it's something like 50 to 60% 1 rep max. 5 sets of 10 on squats and deadlift especially, even with the lighter percentages, that's going to take a long time. That can just get exhausting and it can just be too time ineffective for a lot of people. The second thing too, in my opinion, if you have, say, typical 5 by 10, you could call that boring but big. I believe that's what it's called, but it's at, say, 60 or 50% of the given weight here. Or you can do 2 back off sets with this style, and that's at 80 to 90%. I think this is ultimately going to be more effective, 1, because it saves more time, and 2, I'd rather do 2 back off sets 90 than 80% going in reverse, as opposed to 5 more sets of this same exercise times 10, but we're kind of floating around 60%, and you know, the last couple are probably hard because you're fatigued. But in terms of the intensity comparison, these two here, I'm going to take this one every time. So let's say, for example, our top set is 300 pounds coming from this chart. Back off number 1, 90% of that. Let's do some quick math. 300 times 90%, 270. Now remember, the 80% too is not 80% of this one. It's still 80% of the top set number. So back to 300, multiply by 80% or 0.8. That goes down to 240 for the second and final back off set. And it is really as simple as that. This is still quality volume here, right? Even if it's just 2 back off sets, you guys can click the video in the top corner. I talked about why my volume went down recently compared to my previous bulk, but my gains went up. You can do this if your intensity is on point and you're doing controlled reps and things like that. So don't get this misconstrued, guys. Again, I know all these hypertrophy cells and these guys on here that pretend they're bodybuilders, they're LARPers. They would be like, oh my God, only 3 sets of bench press? Because what I basically do a lot of the time on my upper one, I would do these 3 sets, because these don't really count because they're just warm-ups. These 3 sets, then after I would go to do something like a pec deck for another 3 sets. So that's only 6 sets of chest, for example, in a given day. I would do another upper day later in the week. Say I repeat something similar. That's only 12 total sets of chest per week. Guys, if your intensity is sufficient and your form is good, 12 sets a week for any muscle group is plenty. Not, oh, it's suboptimal or this or that. You will grow just fine doing that. I have other videos talking about volume. You guys can check those out too, but please don't think, guys, you have to do, I mean, the recommendations I see now, apparently some of these guys now are talking about 52 sets a week because some paper came out and these guys, you know, these science dudes see one paper, even if it's terribly done, awful methods, bad, you know, participants, criteria, all this other stuff, and they think it's the, you know, gold standard because it's content, right? Oh, this study, new study, But these sets are absolutely going to grow whatever muscle groups you're talking about. If you think that these 3 sets alone are going to contribute significantly to your weekly hypertrophy, let alone the strength, you are mistaken. Now, once again, as we get closer to this right here, you could argue that 1 rep maxes aren't really going to do anything for hypertrophy. I can see that argument. Even so though, man, if you're pushing tough, right, if these are hard sets, even for 1 rep, even if you're not going to get a great growth stimulus, you are priming your body to get stronger, which means down the line for the higher reps, you're going to lift more, ergo, right, size and strength, you cannot separate them. The bigger you get, the stronger you get, and vice versa. They work as a unit. They're symbiotic. Now, you have to test this for yourself, right? Because I'm talking about bench press. That was the thing I tested this with. You may find for yourself that the back off sets on squats and deadlifts, especially the stronger you get, they may be more taxing. Because if you're at the point I am where you can have a top set of deadlift of well over 500 pounds, those back offs are still going to be heavy, and the deadlift in general is a very taxing exercise, even for low volume. So I'd say, at least from my experience, I did this with a bench press. I think this would be more suitable for pressing, generally speaking, but it also depends on the person, because some people can squat and deadlift up storms for volume and they're fine. Other people like me have, you know, the low back might start to kind of wear out quickly just based on leverages. Maybe for bench press, your shoulders get a little tender, right? So you have to test this out for yourself. I would say for most people's circumstances though, based on where a lot of you guys are going to be, you should be able to ride this out even on the bigger exercises, probably for a good while. So typical 5-3-1, because I did that before I really thought of the 2 back off set method, this works fine. And then you could just go right into the accessories and other stuff. But I would say this is something definitely worth trying, especially for the problem lifts. Like, I came up with this for the bench because it's such a problem area for me. And I was doing well on normal 5-3-1, but I was like, okay, I want to get a little bit more practice on the bench, but I need to keep the volume pretty moderate. And as you get stronger too, doing straight sets across, like you would for typical other exercises, I recommend that in most cases. Once you're pretty strong, especially the lower the reps you go, you may not be able just your body can't do it to replicate the same top set weight across multiple sets. So that's why the back-offs also come in handy. That's how it goes, guys, when you're talking about more advanced programming and strength and that type of stuff. You know, there's a lot of math going on here. I know some of you, this might kind of be over your head right now, but the more experienced you get, the more you will look into this stuff and likely need it in a lot of cases. This is why you see powerlifters always talking about RPE8 and %1RM and all this other stuff. Once you're pretty strong, guys, you need to really understand your fatigue management and all this other stuff that goes into it. And you have to get more crafty with how to progress, because just adding +5 every single week, or even dynamic double progression, things like that, they can start to really, really slow down, especially if you're cutting or if you're just not bulking your face off. Like, sure, you could bloat max Ripito your way into +5 a week for a long time, but most guys are not going to take the body fat that comes with that, so you got to get more creative. But that is the crux of it. I'm sure you guys are going to have some questions. You can drop them down below. And of course, if you guys are looking for a program to implement this in very seamlessly, especially if you're intermediate, check out the links down below at revivalfitness.org/programs. We have various days, different types of splits, all aimed at the same goal: concurrent training. Yes, you can quote-unquote power build. You can build big muscles and get strong at the same time. It is very possible if you know how to program. Get yours down below and then implement this into the main exercises of those days. But that is it for me, guys. Be sure to send this to a friend that needs to see it. As always, with more in-depth questions, you can join Patreon down below, get in one-on-one conversation with me, as well as join our community Discord. We got hundreds of members over there too, all kinds of fun channels, and save money on some great products and services in the description too. And I will catch you guys next time.